The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains as Jake Morrison guided his horse through the rocky terrain of his cattle ranch. The 28-year-old rancher had inherited this land from his father 3 years ago, and every day brought new challenges. His weathered hands gripped the reins as he surveyed the vast expanse that stretched toward the distant mountains. Jake lived alone in the old farmhouse his grandfather had built 40 years earlier. The wooden structure had seen better days, but it was home. His nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, lived 15 miles to the east, making visitors a rare occurrence in these parts. The isolation never bothered Jake much. He preferred the company of his cattle and his faithful dog, Rusty, to the complications that came with people. That particular morning started like any other. Jake fed the chickens, milked the cow, and prepared to check on the southern pasture where his prize bulls grazed. The routine kept him grounded, gave his life structure in a world that often felt unpredictable. He saddled his horse, Thunder, a strong black stallion that had been his companion for 5 years, as Jake rode toward the southern fence line. Something unusual caught his attention. A large burlap sack lay near the old oak tree that marked the boundary of his property. It wasn't there yesterday when he had ridden this same path. The sack appeared to be moving slightly, which immediately put Jake on high alert. Wild animals sometimes got trapped in various ways, and he had learned to approach such situations with caution. Thunder snorted nervously as they approached the sack. The horse's instincts were usually reliable, and his unease made Jake dismount and proceed on foot. The sack was larger than he had initially thought, roughly the size that could hold grain or feed. But grain didn't move on its own. As Jake got closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A muffled voice was coming from inside the sack. It was a woman's voice, weak and desperate. She was saying something, but the thick burlap made it difficult to understand her words clearly. Jake's heart began to race as he realized someone was trapped inside. He approached carefully, unsure of what he might find or whether this could be some kind of trap. In these parts, you learn to be suspicious of unusual situations. Bandits and outlaws sometimes use tricks to ambush unsuspecting travelers or ranchers. But the voice sounded genuinely distressed, and Jake's instincts told him this was real. The sack was tied tightly at the top with rough rope. Jake pulled out his knife and began cutting through the bindings. His hands worked quickly but carefully, not wanting to accidentally harm whoever was inside. The voice became more urgent as he worked, though still muffled by the heavy material. When the rope finally gave way, Jake pulled open the sack and stepped back in shock. Inside was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair and green eyes that looked up at him with a mixture of fear and relief. She was gagged with a dirty cloth, and her hands were bound behind her back. Her dress was torn and dusty, suggesting she had been through quite an ordeal. Jake immediately removed the gag from her mouth. That's when he heard her clearly for the first time. "I can't breathe. Please," she gasped, taking deep gulps of fresh air. Her voice was hoarse, probably from calling for help for who knows how long. Jake quickly cut the ropes binding her hands, noticing the red marks where they had been tied too tightly. "Ma'am, you're safe now," Jake said, his voice gentle despite his shock at the situation. "What happened to you? Who did this?" He helped her sit up slowly, noting that she seemed weak, but not seriously injured. The woman looked around frantically, as if expecting her captors to appear at any moment. "They could still be nearby," she whispered urgently. "3 men took me from the stagecoach yesterday morning. They said they were taking me somewhere, but I don't know where or why." Jake's mind raced as he processed this information. A stagecoach robbery was serious business, and if there were 3 armed men in the area, they were both potentially in danger. He looked around the empty landscape, seeing no immediate threats but knowing that could change quickly. "What's your name, miss?" Jake asked as he offered her water from his canteen. "Emma," she replied, drinking gratefully. "Emma Clark. I was traveling from Denver to meet my aunt in Silverdale when the stage was attacked. The other passengers, I don't know what happened to them." Her voice broke slightly as she remembered the terrifying experience. Jake had heard of stagecoach robberies in the area, but they usually happened further south, near the main trading routes. For the bandits to venture this far north onto his property suggested they were either very bold or very desperate. Either way, it meant trouble. "Miss Clark, we need to get you to safety," Jake said, helping her to her feet. She was unsteady at first, but seemed to regain her strength quickly. "My house isn't far from here. You can rest there while we figure out what to do next." Emma nodded gratefully, though Jake could see the fear still present in her eyes. As they prepared to leave, both of them kept glancing around the empty landscape, wondering if they were being watched. Jake helped Emma onto his horse and climbed up behind her, making sure she was secure before spurring Thunder into a steady trot toward the farmhouse. The ride back was tense, with both of them listening for any sounds that might indicate pursuit. Jake's mind was already working on what needed to be done. Emma would need food, clean clothes, and medical attention for the rope burns on her wrists. But more importantly, they needed to decide whether to try to reach town or wait and see if the bandits came looking for her. As the farmhouse came into view, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Whatever happened next, he would protect this woman who had literally dropped into his world. Inside the modest farmhouse, Emma Clark sat at Jake's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The simple act of being indoors, safe from the open sky and potential threats, brought her a comfort she hadn't realized she'd been craving. Jake moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, preparing a simple meal of eggs, bacon, fresh bread. "You don't have to do all this for me," Emma said softly, watching him work. Despite her ordeal, she couldn't help but notice how gentle his movements were, how carefully he tended to her needs without making her feel like a burden. "Nonsense," Jake replied, not turning around. "My mother would roll over in her grave if I didn't show proper hospitality to a lady in distress." He paused, then added more quietly, "Besides, it's been a long time since I've had company." "Nice company, anyway." Emma studied his profile as he cooked. Jake Morrison was not what she had expected when she first saw him cutting her free from that terrible sack. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark hair was slightly too long, and his clothes were practical rather than fashionable. But there was something about his steady presence that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Tell me about the men who took you," Jake said, as he set a plate of food in front of her. "What did they look like? Did they say anything about why they wanted you?" Emma shuddered slightly as she remembered. The leader was tall and thin, with a scar across his left cheek. He called himself Colt. The other two were younger, brothers, I think. They kept calling each other Danny and Pete. She took a small bite of eggs, surprised by how hungry she was. "They seemed to know who I was." "Jake. They called me by name before I ever told them." This information troubled Jake more than he let on. Random stagecoach robberies were one thing, but a targeted kidnapping suggested something more serious. "Do you have any idea why someone would want to take you specifically? Any enemies back in Denver?" Emma shook her head slowly. "I lived quietly in Denver with my uncle after my parents died 2 years ago. I worked as a seamstress and kept to myself mostly. The only reason I was traveling to Silverdale was because my Aunt Margaret wrote asking me to come help her run her boarding house. She's getting too old to manage it alone." Jake sat down across from her, his own meal forgotten as he tried to piece together the puzzle. "What about your uncle? Is he wealthy? Could this be about ransom money?" "Uncle Henry is comfortable, but not wealthy enough to attract the attention of kidnappers," Emma replied. "He owns a small dry goods store and lives modestly." "This doesn't make sense, Jake. Why would anyone want me?" Before Jake could respond, Rusty began barking outside. The dog's bark was different from his usual greeting bark, more urgent and warning. Jake immediately stood up and moved to the window, peering out through the curtains. In the distance, he could see 3 riders approaching the house. "Emma, get away from the window," Jake said quietly but firmly. "I think we're about to have visitors." Emma's face went pale as she recognized the fear in Jake's voice. "Is it them? Did they find me?" Jake moved quickly to his gun cabinet and pulled out his rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. "I'm not sure, but we're going to be prepared either way." He handed her a smaller pistol. "Do you know how to use this?" "My father taught me when I was younger," Emma replied. her hands shaking slightly as she took the weapon. The riders were closer now, and Jake could see that one of them matched Emma's description of Colt. The man with the scarred face was indeed leading the other two, and they were heading straight for the farmhouse with purpose rather than coincidence. "They found us," Jake said grimly. "Emma, I want you to go upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. If something happens to me, there's a back window you can climb out of. Take Thunder and ride to the Hendersons' place. Tell them what happened and ask them to get the sheriff. I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Emma said, with more courage than she felt. "They're here because of me. This is my fight too." Jake looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Emma, these are dangerous men. They've already shown they're willing to kidnap and probably kill. I can't let anything happen to you. And I can't let anything happen to you because you helped me," Emma replied firmly. "We face this together. We don't face it at all." The sound of horses' hooves grew louder as the three men approached the house. Jake positioned himself near the front window where he could see them clearly while remaining mostly hidden. Emma crouched behind the kitchen counter, pistol ready, but hands still trembling slightly. "Morrison," a voice called from outside. It was rough and commanding, clearly belonging to the leader. "We know you've got something that belongs to us. Send the girl out. Nobody has to get hurt." Jake called back through the window. "I don't know what you're talking about, stranger." "There's nobody here but me. Don't play games with us, rancher," Colt shouted back. "We tracked her here. We saw you take her from that sack. She's coming with us, one way or another." Emma felt her heart racing. She heard the confirmation that these were indeed her captors. But along with the fear, she felt something else growing inside her anger. These men had terrorized her, hurt her, and now they were threatening Jake. The first person to show her genuine kindness in longer than she could remember. "What do they want with me?" Emma whispered to Jake before he could answer. Another voice came from outside. "Emma Clark." It was one of the younger men. "Your uncle sends his regards. He's very eager to see you married off to the right family. The Blackwood family is offering a handsome sum for your hand, whether you agree or not." Emma's eyes widened in shock and horror. "The Blackwoods," she whispered. "Uncle Henry made a deal with the Blackwoods." Jake looked at her questioningly, and Emma explained quickly, "Richard Blackwood is one of the wealthiest men in Colorado. But he's also known for being ruthless and cruel. His son Marcus has been pursuing me for months, but I've refused his advances. I thought my uncle supported my decision." "Sounds like your uncle decided money was more important than your happiness," Jake said grimly. "But that explains why they're so determined to take you. If Blackwood is paying them, they won't give up easily." The situation was becoming clearer, but no less dangerous. Emma wasn't just a random kidnapping victim. She was a young woman being forced into an unwanted marriage by men willing to use violence to achieve their goals. Jake realized that protecting her might mean standing up against some very powerful people. "Emma," Jake said quietly, "whatever happens here today, I want you to know that you have a choice. You don't have to go with them. And you don't have to marry anyone you don't want to marry." Looking into his steady brown eyes, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced before, the sense that someone truly cared about what she wanted, not what was convenient or profitable for others. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Outside, the three men had spread out around the farmhouse, clearly preparing for a siege rather than a simple negotiation. Jake could see Colt positioning himself near the front porch while the two brothers, Danny and Pete, moved to cover the sides of the house. "Morrison," Colt called out again. "We're running out of patience. You've got 5 minutes to send the girl out, or we start shooting up your nice little house." Jake looked at Emma, who was still crouched behind the kitchen counter. Her green eyes showed fear, but also a determination he was beginning to recognize. "They're not going to give up," he said quietly, "and I'm not giving you over to them." Emma nodded, her grip tightening on the pistol. "Then we fight." Jake smiled grimly at her courage. He had met plenty of men who would have folded under this kind of pressure. Yet here was this young woman, ready to stand her ground against kidnappers and forced marriage. "If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. They have us outnumbered, but we have the advantage of knowing this house and property." "What do you have in mind?" Emma asked. There's a root cellar with a tunnel that leads to the barn, Jake explained. My grandfather built it during the Indian troubles years ago. If you can get to the barn without them seeing you, you can take Thunder and get help. What about you? I'll keep them busy here. Make them think we're both still in the house. Emma shook her head firmly. I told you, we're in this together. Besides, if I run now and something happens to you, I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. Before Jake could argue further, the sound of breaking glass came from the back of the house. One of the brothers had thrown a rock through the kitchen window. Time's up, Morrison, Colt shouted. We're coming in. Jake made a quick decision. The cellar it is, but we go together. We can circle around and get the drop on them from the barn. He led Emma to a trapdoor hidden. It's under a woven rug in the corner of the kitchen. Stay low and stay quiet. The tunnel was narrow and dark, carved out of the earth and supported by wooden beams. Jake went first, carrying his rifle, while Emma followed with the pistol and a lantern Jake had grabbed. The air was musty and cool, a sharp contrast to the warm afternoon above ground behind them. They could hear the men breaking down the front door and shouting as they searched the house. They ain't here, Colt, one of them yelled. The place is empty. Check upstairs, Colt ordered. And Danny, you check that barn? They might have run. Jake and Emma moved as quickly as they dared through the tunnel. It seemed to take forever, but finally they saw light ahead where the tunnel opened into the barn's foundation. Jake helped Emma climb up first, then pulled himself up into the familiar space filled with hay and farm equipment. The barn was quiet, except for the soft nickering of Thunder and Jake's other horse. Molly Jake quickly saddled both horses, while Emma kept watch at the barn door. Through a crack in the wooden boards, she could see Danny approaching the barn, rifle in hand. Jake, she whispered urgently. One of them is coming. Jake finished with the saddles and moved to Emma's side. Danny was about 50 feet away and walking cautiously toward the barn. When I count to 3, I want you to mount Thunder and ride hard toward the Henderson place, Jake said. I'll handle Danny and then catch up with you. No, Emma said firmly. I have a better idea. Before Jake could stop her, Emma opened the barn door and stepped out with her hands raised, the pistol tucked behind her back. Don't shoot, she called to Danny. I surrender. Jake's heart stopped as he watched. Emma walked toward the armed man, but then he realized what she was doing. Danny lowered his rifle slightly, distracted by the sight of his quarry apparently giving up. It was exactly the opening Jake needed. Jake slipped out of the barn behind Emma, using the building's shadow to stay hidden. When Danny took another step forward, focused entirely on Emma, Jake struck. He tackled Danny from behind, and the two men went down in a tangle of arms and legs. Danny's rifle flew from his hands and landed several feet away. Emma quickly retrieved the weapon, while Jake struggled with Danny. The younger man was strong, but Jake had the advantage of surprise and desperation. After a brief fight, Jake managed to knock Danny unconscious with a solid punch to the jaw. Are you hurt? Emma asked, rushing to Jake's side. I'm fine, Jake panted, checking to make sure Danny was really unconscious. But his friends heard that scuffle. They'll be here any minute. Indeed, they could hear Colt and Pete shouting from the house and running toward the barn. Jake quickly tied Danny's hands with a rope from the barn, then helped Emma onto Thunder. Now we run, Jake said, swinging up onto Molly, and we don't stop until we reach help. They burst out of the barn at a full gallop just as Colt and Pete came around the corner of the house. Shots rang out behind them. But the two riders were already putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Emma had never ridden so fast in her life. Thunder was powerful and sure-footed, responding to her commands despite her inexperience with him. Jake rode beside her, occasionally looking back to gauge their pursuers' progress. They're following us, Jake called over the sound of hoofbeats. But they'll have to go back for their horses first. We've got a head start. The landscape rushed past them in a blur of brown grass and scattered rocks. Emma felt her fear beginning to transform into something else. Exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. Not just from her immediate captors, but from all the expectations and limitations that had been placed on her by others. As they rode, Emma found herself stealing glances at Jake, His face was set in concentration as he navigated the terrain, but she could see the concern in his eyes when he looked at her. This man, whom she had known for less than a day, had risked everything to protect her. He had asked for nothing in return except the chance to help her stay free. After 30 minutes of hard riding, they crested a hill and saw the Henderson ranch in the distance. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and Emma could see figures moving around the yard. Safety was within reach. Almost there, Jake called encouragingly. But as they began their descent toward the Henderson place, Emma made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of feeling relief at the prospect of rescue, she felt a strange reluctance to involve more people in this situation. She was tired of being someone who needed to be saved. "Jake!" she called out, slowing Thunder's pace. "What if we don't ask the Hendersons for help?" Jake pulled up beside her, confused. "Emma, we need help. There are 3 dangerous men after you, probably more where they came from if the Blackwoods are involved." "I know," Emma said, her eyes bright with determination. "But what if instead of running to other people for protection, we handled this ourselves?" Jake studied her face, seeing a strength there that hadn't been present when he first cut her free from that sack. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Emma looked back toward the direction they had come, then at Jake, then toward the mountains in the distance. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time I stopped letting other people decide what happens to my life." Jake stared at Emma in amazement as her words sank in. The frightened young woman he had rescued from the burlap sack was transforming before his eyes into someone completely different. There was fire in her green eyes now, determination that spoke of inner strength he was only beginning to understand. "Emma, what you're talking about is dangerous," Jake said carefully. "These aren't just local troublemakers. If the Blackwoods are behind this, they have money, influence, and plenty of men willing to do their dirty work. Then maybe it's time someone stood up to them," Emma replied, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "How many other young women have been forced into marriages they didn't want? How many people have been intimidated into doing what the Blackwoods wanted just because they had power?" Jake had to admit she had a point. The Blackwood family's reputation extended even to his remote corner of the territory. Richard Blackwood owned mines, ranches, and businesses across Colorado, and he wasn't known for taking no for an answer. His son Marcus was cut from the same cloth, expecting to get whatever he wanted through money or force. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We go back," Emma said simply. "We turn the tables on them. Instead of running away from this fight, we take it to them." Jake shook his head. "Emma, that's suicide. There are 3 of them, probably more on the way. They're armed and experienced. But they don't expect it," Emma pointed out. "They think I'm a helpless victim who will keep running. They think you're just a simple rancher who will eventually give up and hand me over to avoid trouble." Jake, I had to smile at that assessment. "You know, for someone who was tied up in a sack this morning, you've certainly developed some strong opinions about strategy. Maybe being tied up in a sack was exactly what I needed to realize I'm tired of being helpless," Emma replied. "Jake, I've spent my whole life doing what other people expected of me. When my parents died, I went to live with Uncle Henry because that's what was proper. When Marcus Blackwood started pursuing me, I tried to handle it politely and quietly because that's what was expected of a lady. When Uncle Henry made arrangements behind my back, I was going to go along with traveling to my aunt's house because I didn't know what else to do." She paused, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched in all directions. "But you know what? I'm done being what other people expect. If the Blackwoods want me badly enough to hire kidnappers, then maybe. I have more power in this situation than I thought." Jake found himself admiring her courage, even as he indeed worried about her safety. "And what do you think we can accomplish by going back? Even if we manage to capture Colt and his men, the Blackwoods will just send more. Then we make sure the cost becomes too high for them to continue," Emma said. "We expose what they're doing. We make enough noise that other people start asking questions about their methods." Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. The practical part of his mind told him this was a foolish plan that would likely get them both killed. But another part of him, a part that had been stirring to life since the moment he saw her green eyes looking up at him from that sack, Wanted to stand beside her and fight. You realize that if we do this, there's no going back, Jake said finally. The Blackwoods don't forgive people who cross them. Even if we win this battle, the war might continue for years. Then at least it will be a war I chose to fight, Emma replied. Jake, I can't ask you to risk your life for my problems. You've already done more than anyone could expect. If you want to take me to the Hendersons and wash your hands of this whole situation, I'll understand. Jake looked at this remarkable woman who had entered his life so dramatically and unexpectedly. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been checking fence lines and planning for the winter. Now he was contemplating taking on one of the most powerful families in the territory, and the strangest part was that it felt right. You know what, Emma? Clark? Jake said with a grin that transformed his weathered features. I think you might be the most interesting thing that's happened in my life in a very long time. If you're determined to take on the Blackwoods, then I'm with you. Emma's face lit up with a smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. Really, you'll help me fight back? I'll help you fight back, Jake confirmed. But we're going to be smart about it. We're not just going to charge in with guns blazing. We need a plan. They dismounted near a cluster of rocks that provided cover and began working out their strategy. Jake's knowledge of the terrain, combined with Emma's insights into the Blackwood family's methods, gave them several options to consider. First, we need to capture Colt and his men without getting ourselves killed, Jake said. If we can take them alive, we can get them to talk about who hired them and what the exact arrangements were. They won't admit to anything, Emma pointed out. Men like that don't betray their employers. They might if they thought it would save their lives, Jake replied. And if they don't, we still have them off the board. The Blackwoods would have to start over with new men, and that takes time. Emma nodded, seeing the logic. What about the long-term problem? Even if we stop this immediate threat, Marcus Blackwood isn't going to give up just because his first attempt failed. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, There might be a way to solve that problem too, but you're not going to like it. Tell me, if you were married to someone else? Someone the Blackwoods couldn't intimidate or buy off. It would end Marcus's pursuit permanently, Jake said carefully. Marriage is still a legal protection for women in situations like this. Emma stared at him, understanding the implications of what he was suggesting. Are you proposing to me, Jake Morrison? Jake felt his face flush red. I'm just saying it's an option. A practical solution to a practical problem. Nothing romantic about it. But even as he said the words, Jake knew they weren't entirely true. Something had been growing between them since the moment he cut her free from that sack. He couldn't call it love yet. But it was definitely more than just practical concern for a stranger in trouble. Emma studied his face carefully, seeing past his attempt to make the suggestion sound purely businesslike. And what would you get out of such an arrangement? The satisfaction of knowing you're safe, Jake said honestly. And maybe the chance to find out what it would be like to have a partner instead of just living alone with my cattle and my dog. Emma felt her heart racing as she considered the enormity of what he was suggesting. Marriage to a man she had known for less than a day was certainly not what she had planned when she left Denver. But then again, nothing that had happened in the last day had been part of any plan. Let's deal with our immediate problem first, Emma said finally. If we survive the next few hours, we can discuss long-term solutions. Jake nodded, though he couldn't help feeling disappointed by her non-answer. Fair enough. Now, here's what I'm thinking we should do about Colt and his friends. Jake and Emma devised a risky but simple plan to turn the kidnappers' expectations against them. While Colt and Pete searched the Henderson Ranch area, Jake and Emma would return to the Morrison Ranch and set a trap. The key is making them think they have the advantage, Jake explained as they moved through the hills, avoiding main trails. We let them find us, but on our terms. Where we control the situation, Emma had torn fabric from her damaged dress to tie back her auburn hair. Her green eyes bright with determination. Her transformation from frightened captive to determined fighter continued to amaze Jake. What about Danny? He'll be awake by now, Emma asked. That's part of the plan, Jake replied with a grin. Danny is going to help us, whether he wants to or not. Approaching the ranch from the wooded area behind the barn, They saw that Colt and Pete had returned. Their horses were tied near the house, and chimney smoke indicated the men had made themselves comfortable while waiting for their partners in the barn. They found Danny awake and struggling against his bonds. His eyes widened, seeing Emma, and he made muffled sounds through his gag. "Hello, Danny," Emma said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend. "I hope you're comfortable. We need to have a little chat." Jake removed the gag, and Danny immediately cursed. "You're both dead when Colt finds you. The Blackwoods don't pay us to fail, and we ain't never failed yet. Tell me, Danny, exactly how much are the Blackwoods paying you?" Emma asked, settling on a hay bale across from him. Danny's eyes darted suspiciously. "Enough to make it worth our while. More than enough to make sure we don't give up. $500? 1,000? Emma guessed. Danny's expression confirmed she was in the right range. Jake whistled low. "That's serious money for a kidnapping job. What I want to know is what happens if you fail." Emma continued. "Do the Blackwoods pay for failure?" Uncertainty flickered across Danny's face. "We ain't gonna fail, but if you did," Emma pressed, "if you went back empty-handed and had to explain how a simple rancher and helpless woman outsmarted 3 experienced men, what would happen then?" Jake understood Emma's strategy. She wasn't just seeking information. She was planting doubt about his employers. The Blackwoods are known for their temper when things don't go their way. Emma continued conversationally. "I've heard stories about what happens to people who disappoint them." Jake picked up her lead. "There was that mining foreman who lost a shipment to claim jumpers. They found him floating in Clear Creek a week later. This true story had the desired effect on Danny, who looked genuinely worried. "You're trying to scare me," Danny said without conviction. "I'm trying to help you understand your situation," Emma replied calmly. "Right now, Colt and Pete think you're dead or captured. They're probably making plans to continue without you. If they succeed, you get nothing. If they fail, you all face the Blackwoods' disappointment together," Jake added. "But there is a third option." Danny looked wary. "What kind of option?" "The kind where you walk away with your hide intact and maybe traveling money," Jake said. "All you have to do is help us end this standoff without anyone getting killed." "You want me to betray Colt?" Danny asked incredulously. "I want you to save your own life," Emma said bluntly. "Danny, I'm never going to marry Marcus Blackwood. Not today, not ever. That means this job is doomed from the start. The only question is how many people get hurt before it's over." Danny stared at her, perhaps seeing for the first time that this wasn't the meek, frightened woman they'd expected to handle. "You're serious, dead serious," Emma confirmed. "I'd rather die than be forced into marriage with that man. So your choice is simple. Help us end this peacefully, or watch everything fall apart violently." Jake could see Danny wavering. The younger man clearly wasn't the brightest kidnapper, and the possibility of walking away from a doomed job with money was obviously appealing. "What exactly would I have to do?" Danny asked reluctantly. "Help us capture Colt and Pete without anyone getting shot," Jake explained. "Then you're free to ride away. I'll even give you $50 for supplies and a head start. And if I don't..." Emma's voice turned cold. "Then when the sheriff arrives tomorrow morning, you'll face charges for kidnapping, assault, and attempted forced marriage. That's a hanging offense in most territories." Danny's face went pale. Clearly, he hadn't considered the legal ramifications. Colt said this was all legal, that your uncle had given permission and everything. "My uncle doesn't own me," Emma said firmly. "No one can give permission for someone else to be kidnapped and forced into marriage. Colt lied to you, Danny. You've been breaking the law from the moment you took me from that stagecoach." Jake watched as full reality dawned on the young man. Danny wasn't evil, just stupid and desperate for money. Given a way out that didn't involve violence or prison, he was clearly tempted. "Okay," Danny said finally. "What do you want me to do?" Jake quickly outlined the plan. Danny would call to his partners, claiming he'd escaped and found their trail. When Colt and Pete came to the barn, Jake and Emma would be waiting in positions to get the drop on both men simultaneously. "Remember?" Jake warned as he positioned Danny near the barn door. "If you try to double-cross us, you'll be the first one to get hurt." Danny nodded nervously. I understand. I just want out of this mess. Emma took position behind hay bales where she could, cover the barn's main entrance with Danny's rifle. Jake climbed into the loft with a clear view of the entire barn floor and both doorways. They waited in tense silence until footsteps approached from the house. Colt. Pete, Danny called as planned. I got free. They came back here. The barn door opened, and Colt entered cautiously, gun drawn. Pete followed, also armed and alert. Both men looked around suspiciously before focusing on Danny. How'd you get loose? Colt demanded. The ropes were loose. Danny lied. I've been working on them since you left. Where are they now? That's what we want to know, Pete said. We searched all around the Henderson place and didn't find them. I think they're hiding somewhere on this property, Danny continued, following Jake's script. Maybe in the root cellar or house. Colt nodded, lowering his weapon slightly. Make sense? They wouldn't want to involve neighbors if they could help it. That was when Jake made his move. Drop your guns. He called from the loft, rifle trained on Colt, simultaneously. Emma stood from behind the hay bales, weapon aimed at Pete. You're surrounded. Do as he says. For a moment, nobody moved. Colt's scarred face twisted with rage as he realized they'd been outmaneuvered. Pete looked between Jake and Emma, calculating whether he could get a shot off before they fired. Don't even think about it, Pete, Jake warned. I can put a bullet in you before you clear leather. This is impossible, Colt snarled. You're just a rancher and a seamstress. You can't outsmart professionals. Apparently we just did, Emma replied calmly. Now drop your weapons and kick them away. Reluctantly, both men complied. Jake climbed down while Emma kept them covered. Within minutes, both Colt and Pete were securely tied next to the barn wall. Now, Jake said, settling in front of the bound men, we're going to have a conversation about who hired you and what exactly the arrangement was. Colt glared defiantly. Go to hell, rancher. That's not very cooperative, Emma observed. Jake, maybe we should just take them to town and let the sheriff sort it out. No. Pete spoke up quickly. Wait a minute. Maybe we can work something out. Colt shot his partner a murderous look, but Pete ignored him. Look, we was just hired to bring the lady back to Denver. Nobody said nothing about killing or hurting anyone. Who hired you? Jake asked. Pete glanced nervously at Colt before answering. Marcus Blackwood himself. Paid us half up front, promised the rest when we delivered the girl. And what were the exact instructions? Bring her back alive and unharmed for the wedding, Pete admitted. If she fought too much, we could rough her up a little to keep her quiet. But nothing permanent. Emma felt sick hearing herself discussed like cargo, but kept her voice steady. What about the other stagecoach passengers? Told them it was a robbery? Took their money and valuables to make it look real? Pete said. Nobody got hurt bad, just scared. This was valuable information. If they could prove Marcus Blackwood had personally hired these men to kidnap Emma, it would be a serious crime even for someone with his wealth and influence. Pete, you idiot. Colt finally exploded. Shut your mouth. But Pete was in full confession mode, apparently hoping to minimize his own trouble. There's more, he said. Blackwood told us if we couldn't bring her back willing, we should make sure she couldn't marry anyone else either. Jake felt his blood run cold. What does that mean? Means if she wouldn't come peaceful, he was supposed to make sure she had an accident on the way back, Pete said quietly. Emma stared at him in horror. He ordered you to kill me if I wouldn't cooperate? Not in so many words. That was the idea, Pete admitted. Jake looked at Emma and saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. This wasn't just about forced marriage anymore. Marcus Blackwood was willing to commit murder to get what he wanted, which meant Emma would never be safe as long as he was free to act. Well, Emma said grimly, I think that settles the question of whether we're going to fight back or not. The revelation that Marcus Blackwood was willing to have Emma killed rather than let her escape marriage to him changed everything. Jake and Emma spent the rest of the evening planning their next moves while keeping their 3 prisoners securely, tied up in the barn. We need evidence, Jake said as they sat in his kitchen. Documents spread across the table. Pete had revealed the location where they were supposed to meet Blackwood's other men. as well as details about the payment arrangement. Even with Pete's confession, still our word against one of the most powerful men in the territory. Emma nodded. Studying the crude map Pete had drawn of the meeting location, but what if we could get Marcus to incriminate himself? What if he thought the kidnapping had succeeded? Jake looked at her questioningly. What do you have in mind? Pete said they were supposed to meet Blackwood's men tomorrow evening at Devil's Canyon to hand me over, Emma explained. What if we showed up for that meeting? Emma, that's suicide. There could be a dozen armed men waiting there. Not if we do it right, Emma said, her eyes bright with determination. Think about it, Jake. Marcus Blackwood has never seen me fight back. He expects a frightened, submissive woman who will be grateful to be rescued from kidnappers. What if we gave him exactly what he expects right up until the moment we don't? Jake began to understand her thinking, though he still didn't like the risk involved. You want to pretend to be his willing victim? I want to get close enough to him to make sure he confesses to what he's done, Emma said. If we can get him talking in front of witnesses, admitting to the kidnapping and the threats, then we'll have what we need to destroy him. And how do you propose to get witnesses to a secret meeting in Devil's Canyon? Emma smiled. We bring our own witnesses. Sheriff Thompson from Silverdale is supposed to be an honest man according to my aunt's letters. What if we convinced him to be nearby when this meeting takes place? Jake had to admit the plan had merit, though it was still extremely dangerous. We'd have to time everything perfectly, and you'd have to convince Blackwood that you'd given up, that you were willing to marry him after all. I can be very convincing when I need to be, Emma said quietly. I've spent most of my life pretending to be what other people wanted me to be. The difference is this time, I'll be doing it for my own reasons. They spent the next several hours refining the plan. Jake would pose as one of the kidnappers, claiming that Colt had been killed in the capture, but that they had successfully broken Emma's spirit. Emma would play the part of a defeated woman, frightened enough to agree to anything that would keep her alive. The real challenge would be coordinating with Sheriff Thompson without alerting Blackwood's people to the trap. Jake would have to ride to Silverdale first thing in the morning, convince the sheriff to trust a stranger's word about a serious crime, and get back in time for the evening meeting. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Jake said as they prepared to get some rest. What happens after we expose Blackwood? Even if we succeed in getting him arrested, his family has enough money to buy his way out of most legal troubles. Emma was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking about that too. Maybe it's time I disappeared entirely. Emma Clark could have an accident, and someone new could start over somewhere far from here. Is that really what you want? Jake asked softly. To spend the rest of your life running and hiding? What's the alternative? Even if we destroy Marcus, there will always be other men like him. Other people who think they can control my life because I'm a woman alone in the world. Jake took a deep breath, knowing he was about to risk everything on words that might change both their lives forever. You don't have to be alone in the world. Emma looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his brown eyes. Jake, ... I know we've only known each other for 2 days, he said quickly. I know this whole situation is crazy and dangerous, and not exactly the romantic courtship most women dream of. But Emma, I've never met anyone like you. The way you've handled all of this, the courage you've shown, the way you make me want to be better than I am. I don't want to lose that. What are you saying? Jake stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the dark landscape. I'm saying that my offer of marriage wasn't just about protecting you from the Blackwoods. I'm saying that somewhere between cutting you out of that sack and watching you face down 3 armed men, I fell in love with you. Emma felt her heart racing as she absorbed his words. Love. It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything she had never dared hope for. Someone who saw her strength instead of her weaknesses. Someone who wanted to stand beside her instead of in front of her. Jake, she said softly, I need you to know that if you're with me, this kind of danger might not end with the Blackwoods. I seem to attract trouble. Jake turned back to her with a smile. Emma, 2 days ago my biggest excitement was a sick calf. You've brought more adventure into my life in 48 hours than I've had in years. If trouble comes with loving you, then I guess I'll just have to learn to handle trouble. Emma stood up and crossed the room to him, looking up into his weathered face. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we go down this path, there's no going back. Instead of answering with words, Jake cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Emma felt something inside her that had been locked away for years finally open up. When they broke apart, Emma smiled up at him. I guess that's my answer about the marriage proposal. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Emma confirmed. But first, we have a job to finish. The next morning brought crisp air and clear skies, perfect weather for what might be the most important day of their lives. Jake rode out early for Silverdale, leaving Emma to guard their prisoners and make her own preparations for the evening's deception. Sheriff Thompson turned out to be exactly the kind of lawman Jake had hoped for. Honest, competent, and outraged by the story of Emma's kidnapping and the threats against her life. He agreed immediately to bring several deputies and position them around Devil's Canyon before the scheduled meeting. You sure this young lady can handle herself in a situation like this? The sheriff asked as they rode back toward the canyon. Sheriff Jake replied, I've never met anyone who can handle herself better. As the sun began to set, Emma made her final preparations. She had torn her dress further and mussed her hair to look like someone who had been through a terrible ordeal. But underneath the facade of defeat, her green eyes still burned with determination. Remember, Jake said as they approached Devil's Canyon, no matter what Blackwood says or does, don't break character until you hear my signal. Emma nodded, then reached over and squeezed his hand. Jake, if something goes wrong tonight, I want you to know that these have been the best 2 days of my life. Nothing's going wrong, Jake said firmly. We're going to finish this, and then we're going to start the rest of our lives together. As they rode into the canyon where Marcus Blackwood was waiting, Emma Clark prepared to give the performance of her lifetime. But this time, she wasn't performing to please someone else or to avoid trouble. This time, she was performing to take control of her own destiny once and for all. The final confrontation with the man who had tried to own her was about to begin, and Emma had never felt more ready for anything in her life.